Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist and today we're going to be doing a Subterror Shaddoll deck profile. So I'm really excited for this one for you guys because it's actually a Patreon request deck profile for Tyler. So Tyler actually asked me to build a Subterror deck that can incorporate some of the behemoths into this build. And I'm really excited to include one of the best flip effect archetypes in the entire game in the form of Shaddoll. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can come part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below, just like Tyler did, for all those awesome rewards like getting your name description for every single video, getting a signed card to the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month you're a patron along with test stands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Subterror Guru. Guru is a very awesome card for this particular deck because it has a really good search effect. That when it's flipped face up, you get to add a Subterror card from your deck to your hand. It also has the ability that you can target one other face up monster on the field and change that monster, and also change this card to face down defense position, and it's a quick effect if you control another Subterror card, which is a really awesome effect because flipping your monsters face down helps out a lot because you can kind of turn Winda on and off where your opponent can't special summon but one time per turn on their turn, and then you can flip it face down during your turn, do all your special summoning, and then flip it right back up, which is really awesome for this particular deck. We then play 3 copies of Subterror Fiendess. Subterror Fiendess is a really awesome card as well, because she's kind of like a hand trap, because during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, and then target a Subterror monster you control, negate the activation if you do change that targeted monster to face down defense position, which is a really important effect of Fiendess that you're going to be using all the time, just discarding her to give you a negation and flipping your Guru back face down, so you can then set up for another search, which is really cool. So getting into the Subterror behemoths that we play a single copy of the Lava Turtle. This card is really good. When it's flip face up, you can change all other face up monsters on the field into face down defense position. You can only effect this card once per turn, which is a really good effect because this basically flips every single monster on the field face down, which helps out to immediately interrupt your opponent, especially if you're using something like a Subterror Final Battle. They can just immediately flip this card face up midway through your opponent's combo before they've started link summoning. Now, all of your Subterror behemoths have a unique effect that when a face-up monster you control is flipped face down, if you control no face-up monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position, and also once per turn you can change this card into face down defense position, which is a really good effect to be able to just special summon these really big boss monsters for free just by having a monster flip face down on your side of the field, which this deck does really easily. We then play a single copy of Subterror Stalagmo. Subterror Behemoth Stalagmo is really good in this deck because when it's flip face up, you get to discard a Subterror monster, and then if you do add or draw 2 cards from the top of your deck, which helps out the deck a lot to just give you a little bit more draw power. We then play a single copy of Glacier. Glacier is also really good because when it's flip face up, you send a card from your deck to the graveyard, which will actually activate your Shaddoll monster's effects, which is super helpful because basically this card says, hey, when I'm flip face up, send a Shaddoll from deck to graveyard and get any Shaddoll effect that you want. We then play a single copy of Umastrix. Umastrix lets you target a monster your opponent controls and banish it, which is a really good effect just to give you an additional banish and kind of disruption against your opponent, because sometimes you will do this mid combo against them and be able to like completely disrupt them because you're going to be targeting a monster that they have and getting rid of it. So Umastrix is probably the best one of them all, but Lava Turtle takes a close second. I really like both of these monsters, but they all kind of hold a special place in the strategy. Getting into the Shaddoll monsters, we're playing 2 copies of Shaddoll Windy. Shaddoll Windy is really good. If she's sent to the graveyard, you get to special summon a Shaddoll monster onto your side of the field and face up defense, but if she's flipped face up, you get to special summon a Shaddoll monster from your deck and face up or face down defense. Now keep this in mind as we're going through the Shaddoll monsters. All the Shaddoll monsters have a unique effect that you can activate either or of the effects per turn. You can't get both. You have to activate either the flip effect or the send to graveyard effect. We then play a single copy of Shaddoll Ariel. Shaddoll Ariel is when she's flipped face up, you get to target a banished Shaddoll monster and special summon it in face up or face down defense. Or if she's sent to the graveyard, you get to target 3 cards from either player's graveyard and banish those targets, which is pretty good as well. We then play a single copy of Shaddoll Beast. Shaddoll Beast is really good because if it's flip face up, you draw 2 and discard a card. If it's sent to the graveyard, you're going to draw a card. So this card always gets you a plus. We play a single copy of Shaddoll Dragon. Shaddoll Dragon, to flip face up, you get to compulse an opponent's monster, which is basically just returning a card on their side of the field to the hand And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to MST or pop a spell or trap. We then play 2 copies of Squigmata. Squigmata, when it's flipped face up, you get to target a monster on the field and destroy it. And when it's sent to the graveyard, you Foolish Burial a Shaddoll card, which is really good as well. We then play a single copy of Hedgehog. Hedgehog is actually really unique and really helpful in this deck, because when it's flipped face up, you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your deck to your hand, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to add a Shaddoll monster from your deck to your hand. I have considered playing this at more than one in this build, because you have a lot of cards that can flip-flop your monsters and flip them face up and then flip them back down, so I did consider actually playing 2 Hedgehog in this build. We then play a single copy of Falco. Falco is when it's flipped face up, you get to target a Shaddoll monster in your graveyard and special summon it and face down defense, or if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to special summon this card and face down defense, which is also very helpful for the deck. We then play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. The Ash Blossoms are basically here just to stop your opponent from all sorts of shenanigans against you, and it's just an overall really good card in this deck. And then we play 2 copies of Effect Veiler for my light target. I wanted my light target to do a little bit more than just special summon itself from the graveyard, like a copy of Hat Trigger in this deck, or not Hat Trigger, Perform Mage, the Perform Mage that special summons itself from the graveyard. I wanted to play something a little bit different than that, and so I played the copies of Effect Veiler, and they help out a lot in the deck, because if you do draw into them, you still get a negation, but if you don't, you can use them for constructs, which is really helpful, because you just get to negate a monster effect. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. And it's actually Trick Clown that I was thinking of. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Terraforming, because you're trying to get to the Hidden City as quickly as possible, because Hidden City is a ridiculous card, especially when you have Guru in hand, or if you don't have Guru in hand, you can just immediately set Guru and then get a playoff, which I'm going to explain in just a second about that cool combo. We're then going to be playing a single copy of Cave Clash. Cave Clash is ridiculous in this deck, but you just want to play one of it, because all Subterror monsters you control gain 500 attack and defense for each set monster on the field. And then once per turn, when a Subterror monster you control inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target a Subterror card in your graveyard, except another copy of itself, and add it back to your hand. Now this card is really good, because you can literally get your Lava Turtle up to 5,000 attack points with this card, because if you have 4 other set cards, 4 other set monsters, it's going to make that monster go all the way up to 5,000, which is really, really good in this deck. And it's a really good card just as an attack boost card. We then play 3 copies of the Hidden City. The Hidden City is a search field spell for your Subterror deck, and it is a fantastic card for what this card does. When it's activated, you get to add a Subterror monster from your deck to your hand, which can be your copies of a Behemoth, it can be a copy of Guru, or it can be a copy of Fiendus. Then it also has the ability that once per turn, you can change one face-down defense position Subterror monster you control to face-up attack or defense, which is a really great effect for this card, because it can also flip-flop your Guru. So if you draw into this card going first, you can activate it, add the Guru, set the Guru, and then activate this card to flip the Guru face-up in defense position and get a search as well, which will make the Fiendus that you search off of the Guru live to then flip the Guru face-down next turn and get a negate, which is why this card is so good in this deck. It also has the ability that once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can change one face-down defense position monster you control to face-up attack or defense position, and then you can negate the attack, which is really good, because if you activate the Fiendus to flip it face down, you can then use this card to flip it back face up and negate the attack, which is really helpful. We then play 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion. Shaddoll Fusion is a great card in this particular deck, because Shaddoll Fusion is basically going to give you all the plays that you need to go into your fusion summoning plays. And also, if your opponent controls a special summon monster, you can use monsters from your deck as well, which is really, really helpful to go into some fusion plays in this deck. We then played just 2 copies of El Shaddoll Fusion. The 2 El Shaddoll Fusions are basically here as quick play fusion spells for your Shaddoll Fusion summons. These 5 are the only 5 that you really need. I don't play a 3rd copy of Shaddoll Fusion, because the deck is already a 42 card deck. So I feel like the El Shaddoll Fusion is just a good 2 of to me, because I'm using it to go in for quick attacks that I need to during battle phase. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Subterror Final Battle. This card is a great searchable card, and what it basically does is this card lets you have 1 of 4 effects, and when it's activated, it does reset itself to your side of the field. So once you get this card one time, you're never going to lose it unless your opponent pops it or banishes it with like a Cosmic Cyclone. So what this card does is you get to activate 1 of the following effects and then set this card back face down instead of sending it to the graveyard. You get to change a Subterror monster you control to face-up attack or defense. You change a face-up Subterror monster monster you control to face down defense, which is pretty cool. Or you change the attack and defense of one Subterror monster on the field to become equal to the combined original attack of that monster. So basically it can make a Guru go up in attack and defense to the combined original amounts, which is about 3,400, which is pretty big. We then have the final effect that this turn the activated effects of your Subterror cards cannot be negated, which makes them all speed spell 4s, which is really, really insane. We then play 2 copies of Subterror Succession. Subterror Succession is a fantastic card in this deck that basically what this card does is it's a search card for your Shaddoll cards, which is kind of neat. What it does is you get to activate one of the following effects, and after you activate that card effect, you reset this card to your side of the field. So what it does is you send a monster from your hand to the, or face up from field to the graveyard, and if you do, add a flip monster from your deck to your hand with the same attribute but a different name, and also that monster, then the monster sent to the graveyard by this effect, which is pretty cool because it actually triggers the effect of your Shaddoll cards that get sent to the graveyard, which is really cool. But then you get a search off of that as well. The second effect is that you send a flip monster from your hand or face down field to the graveyard, and if you do, add a monster from your deck to your hand with the same attribute but a lower original level as the monster before it was sent to the graveyard, which is pretty good as well. We then play a single copy of Shaddoll Incarnation, which is a fantastic card in this deck to be able to just get you different plays, to be able to flip-flop your Shaddoll cards and flip-flop your other monsters in the field. But the really cool thing is the interaction between this and Ariel, because this plus Ariel and a construct and graveyard that you can banish for this card's effect will equal you getting the construct back, because you can target a Shaddoll monster in your graveyard and special summon it. But also with Ariel, when Ariel's flip face up, you have to revive a monster from being banished, and the requirement for flipping a monster is to banish a Shaddoll from the graveyard, which is pretty good. A single copy of Schism. Schism is really good because you can actually use this like a miracle fusion that you can use use the fusion materials from the graveyard to actually fusion summon, which is pretty helpful in this deck because you're going to be sending a lot of cards to graveyard. And then for my last 2 tech cards, it's actually going to be double Junk Sleep. Junk Sleep is a really broken card in this deck because if your opponent normal or special summons a monster, you can change all face down defense position monsters you control to face up attack position, and then during the end phase you can change all monsters you control to face down defense position. So it basically flips all your monsters, gets all their effects off, and then it changes them back to face down defense, which gets their effects off again during your turn, which is really, really good. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Shaddoll Winda. This basically just turns off special summoning because either player can only special summon once per turn, which is really good, and you don't have to super worry about it because you have cards like Junk Sleep that can flip it back face down, and it's a little bit more of a control game when you actually summon Winda. If it's sent to the graveyard, then you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand, and it also has the ability it can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, which is super, super helpful for this card. We then played 2 copies of Construct. I just felt like 2 copies of Construct was plenty. In playtesting, I never ran into the 3rd one, so I just played it at 2. And what she does basically is when she battles a special summon monster, it instantly destroys that monster. And if this card is special summon as well, then you get to send a Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard. And if she's sent to the graveyard, you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand, which is pretty helpful. We then played a single copy of Apokalon. Apokalon can't be destroyed by battle, and it also has the ability that if it's special summoned, you get to target a face card on the field, negate its effects, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap or any Shaddoll card from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and then discard a card from your hand, which is pretty good as well, just having you basically a monster can't be destroyed by battle, but you can only activate either or of those effects per turn. We then play a single copy of Shaddoll Shikinaga. I did think about playing double Shikinaga because it's a primarily earth-based deck, but I felt like one was fine with all the other fusion cards I was playing. But this card is really, really helpful in this build because basically what this card does for the deck is what you're going to do is basically if you have a Shaddoll card in hand, you can negate a card effect, which is super helpful because during either player's turn when a special summon monster activates its effects while you have a Shaddoll card in your hand, you can basically send that Shaddoll card from your hand to the graveyard and negate the effect, which comes in handy a lot in this deck. And also if it's sent to the graveyard, you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand. We then play a single copy of Access Code because it gives us additional pops. This could be a Borreload, a Borrelsaur, whatever you'd like. 1 copy of Appaloosa, the Bow of the Goddess. This card's really helpful at getting you additional monster negations. Unicorn because it shuffles cards back into the deck. Phoenix because it pops spells and traps. A single copy of the Subterror Behemoth Fiendus. Fiendus is it's a good card in this deck because you're playing more flip effect monsters. And it helps out with that a lot because it has the ability to once per turn, if a monster this card points to its flip face up, you get to add a flip monster from your deck to your hand or graveyard to your hand. So it can help you out a lot in that regard. One copy of Shaddoll Construct. It's very easy to make in this deck, and it's a walking polymerization because it lets you fusion summon into a Shaddoll monster, which is really helpful. And this card counts as the light target, so you always have a light target to go into your second copy of Construct. One copy of IP Masquerena because you can link summon during your opponent's turn, which is very helpful. One copy of Cross Sheep because Cross Sheep helps out with the fusion plays, and then a single copy of Gravity Controller as well. The Gravity Controller helps out a lot because what you do with this card is you can actually make any of these fusion monsters in your extra monster zone and link them away to get their graveyard effects off to then get you a Shaddoll spell or trap back from the graveyard if you need it using this card, which is very helpful. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. This was a blast to make. This was super fun. I really enjoyed making this one for you, Tyler. I really think that this deck is a fun deck, and it can do some really insane stuff, especially with the Gru package in here and using the behemoths. Like, nobody sees the behemoths coming because immediately when you play this deck, they think they're playing Gru control, and then you start playing the Shaddolls and they're like, oh wait, what's happening now? And it's a really fun deck. I'm really excited to do test hands for this deck and show you guys the actual potential of this deck because it has some really insane plays. So that's it for this one, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below. We'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.